T-minus 10, 9, 8,
The clock is
7.
operating. We're underway.
Tranquility Base here.
Endeavor, go at throttle up.
Okay, this is just background stuff. Shows the vehicle on the pad. This shows Bob Crippen getting ready to fly. And there's me. And you can see my big project a week before flight was getting bigger United States flags put on our pressure suits. And the reason for that was one of these bureaucrats told me that it had to be a small flag to balance the space shuttle program, and I pointed out to him that the United States was bigger than the space shuttle program.
This shows us in the van, the traditional van that had been carrying Apollo crews out, that we rode out and going into the white room of the vehicle. Everybody had to wear those little masks, theoretically, for our last week there so that we wouldn't contaminate them or something.
They found that nobody at the Cape got sick from us being around them.
This is shutting up the hatch just prior to launch, and that's Don said it gets kind of lonely out there.
This is high-speed ignition of the three main engines. The vibration in the cockpit was very low at this time after the engines light off. The instruments just a little blurred, but you could read every one of them. Look at those babies come up to speed. This is from the cockpit. Shows how the vehicle moves back and forth there. And this is high-speed photography of the bolts blowing and the solid rocket motors lighting off. And all that is water spray right there where they're trying to keep things cool and not having much luck. And this is very high-speed photography. Because when it lit off, there was a couple of thumps, and we started moving up very slowly. Look at these beautiful shocks coming out of the main engine at liftoff, and it's moving a lot faster than that. This shows how close it comes to the intertank access arm, which has always worried me some. It's really getting up and going.
John and I expected a real hard kick in the pants. Here shows that what it looked like out John's window.
It's called tower clear right from the cockpit.
It was actually a really very smooth liftoff with very little shaking associated with it. There's the roll program to head us out over the ocean.
And the vehicle is, the cockpit vibration is such that you can still read all your instruments in there. And maybe it's 10 cycles per second. This shows the roll program from inside the cockpit out the side window, and it's a thing of beauty. It's just as smooth as glass. There's no accelerations involved. And this shows the vehicle speed picking up. It's probably about ready to go supersonic right now, almost going straight up. And we said that's what it's going to do, but I didn't really believe it would, but it did.
We were getting a little lost on our trajectory here that we're still analyzing right now. Also, I was seeing some debris coming off from up over the nose that was coming back and hitting the windscreen and going over the top of the vehicle that we weren't sure what it is, like ice or Sophie. That's the stuff on the external tank that they're still analyzing.
I believe that tail is about 750 feet long, and maybe you can see it better from here, maybe 600-700 feet long, maybe 150, 200 feet wide. It's really impressive. I'm glad we couldn't see that.
Thank goodness for no rearview mirror. The ride was very smooth throughout this. Up in the transonic phase, it shook just a little bit. They're coming through Mach 2.
This is a camera inside the orbiter from the ET doors and shows the external solid rocket motor separation. Isn't that a spectacular shot? And then we show it again from inside the cabin, although the light is much brighter than this.
The big flash across the windscreen.
This shows that we never saw these pictures, but here's a picture of separation outside from high-speed cameras. And isn't that terrific?
From onboard sensations, the only thing we really saw was the flash of light and our normal avionics cues that we had dumped the solids. We did not see them go away nor feel any jolts.
We're less than 1 G right after separation, transverse Gs, and this baby's just chugging along, and it's just as smooth as glass, that ride is.
Here you see some particles coming by John's window, a couple of white objects. There went one that was indicative of the kind of stuff that we'd been seeing throughout the flight.
This is this is umbilical separation back in that view that we saw, and this is external tank separation, and it is a spectacular sight.
That white particles you see there are ice caused by the hydrogen freezing as it's coming out and perfectly nominal.
There's the fitting that goes up in the orbiter. There's the umbilical plate, and there's the tank. And as you can see, all this black material there, that's the way the SOFI works. It chars and turns black. So there's a high heating area in there, and it really caught it. And there's another place that's sort of discolored up here toward the nose of the tank.
There was supposed to have been a tumble valve actuate to start the vehicle tumbling, and it did not work. And from our standpoint, it gave us a much better view of the tank. You'll also see the nose discolored.
It almost looks like the nose is it's got all the SOFI gone from it, because there's a sort of metallic color there, but that might be bright sun.
Yeah, we're not sure of that, and people are analyzing that still. This is a scene of me climbing out of the seat. All of the operations associated with the suit and the seat while you're in zero-G are much easier to handle than it is down here on Earth. I'm just stuffing the helmet in a little bag along with the gloves so that we can tuck them away. There's quite a few connections associated with that suit, but it's no real problem to handle at all in zero-G.
In 1G, we had a lot of problem with this helmet. It was always bumping into the hand controller and firing things. There, you see it's up there out of the way. We finally got it right.
That floats nicely.
I'm not going to tell you this picture was made right after we got into orbit, because I don't think either one of us was that gutty, but we made it later on and then ran it backward.
Actually, we did a suiting exercise while we were on orbit just to make sure that we could get the suits and get back in the seats with no problem, and that's when we filmed this. This is two TV cameras muxed together, one on the left and one on the right, shows the initial payload bay door opening. All of that went nice and smooth. You'll notice the OMS pod coming into view right here. This is the first time we saw some tiles missing off of the OMS pod.
You notice the door kind of hesitates when it opens, too. It did this in a fixture on the ground, and they told us, well, that was due to the fixture. That's the way the door really works.
The camera on the right is an aft camera looking forward. You can see the windows coming. The one on the left is a forward camera looking aft. That door operations went as smooth as it could be, which I was mighty happy, because I didn't particularly care about the thought of going outside and trying to do anything associated with them.
This is a view, panning the outside, that shows the radiators deployed out there. That's a beautiful, beautiful shot with the television.
You can also see those radiators when you look out your forward windows, which surprises us a little bit.
This is an ops mode 8 check out of the hand controller. You move it full throw, and then you read on the cathode ray tube, which is where I'm looking, to see if the hand controller is working properly. And this is very exciting. A little bit of this will last you about 6 months.
This shows a camera forward in the cockpit looking aft, and with John coming out of the seat. This was actually some TV stuff that we did for a status report. Pretty good indication of the kind of problems we have with some of our comm lines, which you had to work pretty hard to make sure you didn't get tied up in those things.
And we stayed tied up in them the whole flight. The government is now looking at wireless mics that I think will really improve the capability of the crew to operate. As you can see there, I'm having to hold mine next to my mouth so I can talk to people.
This is a shot down on our mid-deck storage area where we had all of our stuff stowed, and this was actually just after the press conference, or not press conference, after the conversation we had with the Vice President. Zero-G is something else. That is something that all of you should have an opportunity to experience. It is really fun.
You know, if you could do that in your living room without breaking your leg, you sure would.
There's no problem trying to restrain yourself anywhere down there. I'm in the process here of changing out one of our lyo canisters, which is used that we run the air through to take out all the CO2 and any contamination. It's a very easy job. We had a couple of troughs down there where we stow lyo canisters, and you could just fit your legs down in there and kind of push them apart, and it restrains you very nicely.
Look at this. It shows the mobility that we have down the mid-deck. People thought we needed restraint systems to tie ourselves down in there. You don't need any of that. Now watch this mobility that Bob has when he kicks off and goes up to the top side. Boy, I'll tell you, if that isn't the neatest thing in the world.
The thing about it is you don't really go flying around. you need to move a little bit slowly, otherwise you'll end up banging into something, but there's no problem controlling yourself any place you want to go.
Try that in one gravity and see where it gets.
You see, I just was wearing my socks there. I never put any shoes on while you're on orbit. I don't like to when I'm in the house either, so.
This shows what the television will show you out the window and shows what a great view those spectacular windows gave us. Here's another television view of the Earth.
Now we're coming up to the reason I was glad I was flying with a guy like John that's got all the experience. We're getting ready to come home, and sitting beside a man that knows space testing like he does made you feel mighty good. We're shutting the doors, and all of that again went just like we wanted it to. There were no problems at all associated with it. You can notice there's a little bit of jerky motion when it comes down. We were lowering the starboard door down easy, and you'll notice it bounces pretty good, which we're having to pass on to other following crews to make sure that when they close it, they don't have any problem with overlap. Got her all tucked away, and we're ready to come home.
Now this had them stretch this picture because in the real world there was a beautiful pink up here due to the heat. This is the first part of entry, and there's the sunrise coming up. And we're moving along at about 300,000 feet, and we're just about to 265,000 feet where we go on our first roll reversal. And you'll see that pretty shortly.
Now, we're moving pretty fast, but not quite this fast.
Yeah. That's the first roll reversal. And here's the second roll reversal. It's done at Mach 18 and a half, and this is at 2 frames a second. So we're moving 6 times faster than we would in the real world. 12 times maybe, yeah. Mach 18 and a half, and you really see those clouds go by even in the real world, but it's not quite this fast. The next roll reversal is at Mach 9.8. There it goes.
We did the roll reversal a little bit slower than that, too.
Yeah. And here we come back at the 4.8 roll reversal, and that's Bakersfield out there.
Coming across the hatch key in the Sierras.
And the vehicle sort of rolls wings level, and this is about at 80,000 feet, and then we went to real-time photography, which is only twice as fast as happens in the real world, and as you can see, everything is slowed down quite a bit. We're pretty high right now, maybe 75, 80,000 feet, coming across the lake bed areas that we told you all about. There's China Lake up in that area, up in there, and you can see it out the left window.
There's Cuddyback, that Pork Chop Lake coming into view at the top.
Right at the top. We're coming out to swing around the heading alignment circle, and it sure is a beautiful view. Looking out that window, you can see everything you need to see. There was just no doubt in our minds that we knew exactly where we were in the flight, even by comparing what we had on our normal ground track with what we're seeing on the instrument. There are 3 sisters up there.
The ride in up to this point had been nice and smooth, and the vehicle controls really tight. It's a nice handling space.
Chase plane joint up there.
And we're getting ready to go in the turn around what we call our heading alignment circle. That's the Mojave River, which is mainly a dry lake bed or dry river bed out there. John is driving the vehicle at this point in time, and it's really handled nice. We were right down the middle of the corridor all the way.
The remarkable thing about the space shuttle is it's all electric, and when you move the wings somewhere, they stay there. You put the nose somewhere, and it stays there. It's just an admirable handling vehicle. You couldn't ask for anything as responsive and as for this kind of a job. It does it exactly like you want it to.
Couldn't have ordered a better day for coming back in. We could have navigated visually all the way from when we hit the coast, which was just a little less than Mach 7 up south of the San Francisco area, all the way down to the San Joaquin Valley to the Edwards. It was no problem knowing where you were at any time.
There's the highway north of Edwards there, and you swing across the lake bed, and it's kind of hard to see at first in these films, but there's the old aim point right there. We're starting to come down the glide slope there. The runway's still hard to see there.
We have some aim lights that give you an indication of what your glide slope is out there that we refer to as taffy lights. We also had locked onto a microwave landing system, and all of those ended up agreeing right on as to where we were, no doubt whatsoever.
Here's our old chase plane. He's flying back and forth across the bottom of the vehicle, taking pictures to see if there's any tile damage that would not show up. You know, they thought they might get some from the rocks and everything on the desert floor, so he's covering that right now. And Chase Plane did a real terrific job. The vehicle is very easy to control in this flight regime. We're about into pre-flare right now.
And I was flying about 285 knots at this point. We're like about a 20-degree glide slope. Everything was just as smooth as could be.
We're going into pre-flare, and this is how it looks out the window. You may be able to see 2 or 3 of those lights. Two white lights is what we're looking for. There are 2 there. We start our pull-up now, and there'll be 3. You'll see the 3rd one come on. So we're on a 20-degree glide slope to pre-flare, which means we can only land right down here at the touchdown point. Here's the wheels coming down.
The wheels really snap down fast. They're much faster than what I anticipated them.
And there's a couple of big black marks you'll see coming up here pretty soon. There they are. That's the touchdown point, and here we go, boy. What a machine. It didn't know about that. Supposed to land on the touchdown point.
But actually, you should understand, John was not trying to touch down on the touchdown point. What we were trying to do was to find out what the real deceleration and touch down about on an airspeed, which was about 185 knots. And all of the ALT flights and this one ended up landing long, which looks to us like we have a little bit more lift capability than what had been predicted.
And we rolled right up here so Kennedy Space Center's recovery team could get a hold of us and hook the coolant up as fast as possible. We rolled into the runway intersection. We did that on purpose, so we hardly used any brakes on this rollout, and there's the vehicle sitting, and she is a beauty. That's, believe it or not, the weight of that vehicle right there is about right around 99 tons. I keep reading where it's 150,000 pounds or 80 tons, but that one right there is 99 tons. It's quite a performance thing to return from orbit with 99-ton spacecraft and get her back all in one piece, I think.
I'd like to welcome all of you to the 25th anniversary of the Space Shuttle flight. And we're here today to honor two outstanding astronaut test pilots, John Young and Bob Crippen, which flew Columbia on her maiden voyage. We have more than 1,000 employees here at the Kennedy Space Center that were here for that first flight. How many folks in this audience were here for STS-1? So a number of you came out here today. Welcome. A couple of milestones that we had for Columbia was Columbia arrived at the Kennedy Space Center from California on March 24th, 1979. Now, of course, we had about 20 months worth of work that we had to do on Columbia before it was ready to fly. A vehicle rolled over to the VAB on November the 24th, 1980. Rolled to the pad on December the 29th, 1980, and then launched on April 12th, 1981. On rollover day, John spoke to the employees and said, "We've come to pay tribute and give word of thanks and a hearty well done to the people who have worked on the spaceship. It's a beautiful vehicle." You know, it's the same work, this workforce is getting ready to do another launch, STS-121, coming up here very soon. And I will tell you that the dedication that was put into STS-1, that same dedication, that same attention to detail is going in to the next flight that we're going to fly, the next return to flight. I just like to thank all of you for the hard work that you do and for the discipline and just the unbelievable dedication you put into this vehicle. You know, I could introduce John Young and Bob to you. I read their bios, and I could tell you we could go on and on and on. I think the first thing I would tell you is John Young, when he flew on STS-1, it was his 5th flight. I think that kind of tells you everything right there. So, and Bob Crippen, he became an astronaut in 1969, and he was working on Apollo-Soyuz. He also worked on Space Lab as backup and support crew, and then his first flight was STS-1, and then he flew 4 more times after that. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce John Young and Bob Crippen.
for us to be here today to talk about STS-1. Sure nice to see everybody out here. I see there's a lot of gray-headed folks out here. How many people in here, again, for a show of hands, worked on STS-1?
Wow. I think they all deserve a hand, please.
Well, how many people in here worked on the American-Russian docking mission? Anybody do that?
All right.
Yeah. How about Apollo? Any Gemini folks out there? All right. That's great. Well, I just like to say this about STS-1. When they brought it down here, it wasn't ready to fly. I mean, it hadn't even been built yet. The tiles kept falling off when they, and everybody knew we was in these meetings, and we'd sit in there and they'd say the tiles are going to fall off and they're going to zipper down and everything's going to go bad, and then they hadn't even developed densification, so the tiles were falling off at 4 and 5 psi out there when y'all were working on putting them on. I think you had to put on more than 7,000 when it was here. Imagine that. And Bob and I got to participate in tests, end-to-end tests. We did a 27.5-hour end-to-end test where we opened and closed the payload bay doors and worked the software integrated into the vehicle so they thought it was flying into orbit and out, ascent, orbit, and entry. That's never been done again. Start the APUs in OPF. Start up the APUs in OPF and all that smoke and fire coming out. And they say if you can breathe hydrazine and it gets in your lungs, you're dead. And of course, everybody in OPF breathed it. We're still okay, right? Wasn't that fun? And we did things you'd never imagine. We had a flight readiness firing out there, and the engines worked just really good, and so it worked great. And then when we got back from flying the mission, Chris Kraft said it best. He said, we just got infinitely smarter. Now, what didn't we know when we flew? Well, we didn't have any idea about the capabilities and limitations of our wind tunnel tests, like the solid rocket motors, normal forces, and the plume effects wasn't. They'd done it with little bitty scale models, and it had no effect on what those 3 million pound thrust guys do, on the real vehicles, which made it sort of pitch straight up. And then when we got into orbit and came back, we had no idea of what the real gas effects were on the vehicle, and we didn't know about the way it was going to operate. And we had a big side slip when we first did our first roll in, and if that side slip was 4 degrees, there was too much yaw. The thing predicted there was too much yaw and not enough roll, and that was predicted by the pre-wind tunnel test, and the actual was just the opposite. It was supposed to have been roll and no yaw, but they had to fix that next time or the time after, because if we'd have kept that side slip in there and the trim integrator hadn't took it out, Crip and I would have spun around a couple of times, and we'd have been in the middle of the Pacific Ocean somewhere. Y'all have been looking for us. Yeah. And then when we came on back, we measured the way it rolled back and forth across the ground track, and we found out the lift-to-drag ratio was just like what they predicted at 40 degrees angle of attack, which was amazing considering how little we knew. And then when we got down a little slower, it oscillated at 1.6 Mach number, where the roll coefficients went to 0, and we didn't have those aileron, we didn't have the amount of roll compared to the amount of yaw figured out right, and we figured that lately, so we had that oscillation. And then when I come down on final at Edwards, I wanted to find out what the lift-to-drag ratio was out of ground effect, and they said it was going to be 4.45, and the darn thing, you know what we'd done? They'd overestimated how much tile drag we were going to have. And that good old Columbia landed about 1,200 feet further down the runway than we thought it would based on the tile, because we had a lift-to-drag ratio of, instead of 4.45, we had 4.9. It was awesome. I mean, when you're talking about flying a vehicle with a real low lift-to-drag ratio, you do instantly everything right. After you've been up in space for 10, 11 days, doing instantly everything right is not a likely event. But anyway, so we had a lot of fun, and the thing rolled out, and we proved all these things out, and came back, and we're mighty grateful. And the work that y'all did enabled us to do that, because y'all paid every attention to every detail. Now, we work like run the APUs in the orbital processing facility. Only an idiot would do that, right? And we did it. And we work with hypergols. And you know, hypergols are very dangerous propellants. But you know how to handle them, because when you mix them together, they burn. Unlike stuff they want to use called green propellants, they want to develop. They only want $200 million to develop them, and we get these green propellants. But y'all know how to use hypergols, and they're pretty safe operating things, but they're dangerous, and you have to be careful with them. And almost everything we do is dangerous. We work in atmospheres that are very unforgiving to human beings staying alive if they're not clear every time of what you're doing. So y'all just be careful and watch everything, because flying in space is dangerous, and working on a good old vehicle is dangerous. Y'all said Ohms Pods and the Ford RCS has got stuff in the tanks, you know, that if it leaks out, what they always told us, like, if you can breathe monomethyl hydrazine, you're dead. Well, try to hold your breath if you smell anything like it, I guess, while you're getting out of there. But I know when we fired Gemini 3, we fired the Gemini 3 because Gus wanted to fire it, and we fired the RCS, and I breathed monomethyl hydrazine, and I'm still here. But, you know, so take it with a grain of salt. But it's a dangerous business we're in, but exploring space is really the key to the future. Now, everybody's worried about, are they going to be working in 5 or 10 years from now around here? If I could predict the future, and I hope that I can, you know, there's no way we can finish up building that space station by 2010. You know, it's 2006 right now, and you got to fly 18 missions or so with a space shuttle till 2010. So we're going to have to keep flying it, and we're going to have to build a crew exploration vehicle at the same time. It's going to be a lot of fun, and I sincerely believe if the future goes the way it goes, and we fly the space shuttle till we get things done right on the space station, and we build a crew exploration vehicle and fly that, there's going to be more people working down here at the Cape rather than less. If I had to predict the future, I predict that's what will happen. I never had no luck predicting the future yet. But it, you know, it might people off this planet is the most important program that's going on in the United States of America and on this planet today, because single planet species don't last. And right now we're a single planet species. When we develop all the technologies we need to develop to live and work on the moon and go on to Mars, then we will have developed the same technologies that will save the people that live on this planet, our future civilization. And everybody says, well, who cares about civilization? What we ought to care about is our kids and our grandkids. We ought to be working on future. You know, everybody's worried about 3 gallons of gallon gasoline. We ought to be worried about the future of electrical power that's non-alternative and non-polluting. We aren't, because nobody can think past, you know, next year's gasoline trip. But, you know, we ought to be working on a future, and that's what we're going to be doing when we get ready to go to the moon. Well, if we learn to live and work on the moon, then we'll have solved many problems that will protect people on this planet for the future. And I think that's a wonderful job opportunity for everybody in this room to have, because I think you'll be working a long time, and what you'll be doing is very important to your kids and your grandchildren. So I won't bore you with any more disastrous talks about STS-1. I'll let Captain Bob tell you a few things about what he's thinking about it.
Well, first, thanks for all coming out and helping us celebrate the 21st anniversary of the shuttle. It's always a pleasure for me to be here at the Kennedy Space Center. It's my favorite place in the whole wide world. And it's mainly because of you, greatest launch team in the world. You do the greatest work, and you've proven that time and time again. And I want to thank John again for allowing me to fly that first flight with him. You know, the selection of crews has always been kind of mysterious. Nobody's ever sure how that worked, even as long as I was in the astronaut office. Now, John was a natural. As Bill mentioned, he had flown 4 times before. He was chief of the astronaut office, and the chief gets to pick who goes fly. So.
That's not exactly right. Captain Crippen was in charge of 600 and something people down in California doing software. And guess what the space shuttle had? 110 pages of software. 110 pages, mind you. And he knew what every one of them did. And I sure didn't. And the worst mistake we made in the whole vehicle design was Captain Crippen was sitting over here, and I was sitting over there, and where they put the damn software, the computer switches, right over me. And he knew all about it. Oh, well. Go ahead, Colonel.
I've always just been John's straight man, you know. But it was a real honor to get picked to go on that first one. John and I both were test pilot trained, and when you look at the space shuttle, it was a test pilot's dream. First, it had never flown in space in an unmanned fashion, which is the way we'd always previously done our launch vehicles. First time we used big solid rockets. First time we had a winged vehicle that was going to come back in and land at a runway, and a number of other firsts. So I couldn't have picked a better flight to go on. And if you're a rookie and you're going on something like that, you want to go with an old pro. And so I was very fortunate to have an opportunity to go fly with John. And like he indicated, we got to train a lot longer than what we planned. I guess maybe we were just a little slow, but the main engines tended to blow up every time we tested them over at Stennis. And as he indicated, the thermal protection system, or these infamous tiles that we had, didn't stick on too well. And I recall, in fact, I was down here as well as John was when they brought Columbia in for the first time, and it looked pretty ratty. They had less tiles on here than what it left out at Edwards. A few more had ripped off. And I remember Walt Caprian telling all of the other NASA centers it was going to take at least 2 years to get that thing ready to fly. And nobody else wanted to hear that, but Cappy was right. It did take us a couple of years, and John and I spent an awful lot of time in the simulators and the training airplanes. We got somewhere like 1,500 approaches in our shuttle training airplane apiece. So we had lots of practice. And as he indicated, we did lots of tests down here at KSC because we got a chance to touch the hardware and interface with people like yourselves who were working on it. I recall about a month prior to the actual flight, we were doing a dry countdown demonstration test, which is essentially going through and everything that you do to launch the vehicle, except you don't fuel it. And John and I went through it, and the test worked out pretty well. We were in our big suits and all that, and we climbed out. But somebody had, not unusual for a test, put a deeve in, and we ended up with the right hand not knowing what the left hand was doing. And we cleared 6 technicians into the aft end of the vehicle while we still had a nitrogen purge going on in the aft. And went in, 5 of them passed out immediately. One, luckily enough, didn't, so that he could call some help. But they never knew what hit them when you walk into a pure nitrogen atmosphere. And John Bornstead and Warren Cole died of that. The others recovered. First people to give their lives for the space shuttle. It is a dangerous business. And those of us that have worked around it a while know that. I know the people that work here at the Kennedy Space Center know that. It's always a chance that if you're not vigilant, that something's going to reach up and bite you in the behind. And I know you guys are focused on that. Don't lose that focus. John and I did a number of tests, and this vehicle being as complicated as it is, I fully anticipated that we were going to count down several times before we actually lifted off. We went out on April the 10th, which some of you might remember, that was a little less than 2 weeks after Ronald Reagan was shot. It wasn't exactly a bright time. There'd been a number of other incidents going on. Reagan had just been president a few months, and the He'd managed to finally free the hostages that we had over in Iran. It had been a long time since we'd flown. Since Skylab, we'd had one mission, the Apollo Soyuz. So there'd been a big gap down here. And so for the first time, I figured, hey, we're just going to go in, climb in again, and sit here a while. And we sat there a while. We had a 3-hour hold because we ran into a problem with the, John blaming it on me, I guess the computers weren't talking to one another. Maybe there's those switches up there, I'm not sure. But we ended up strapped in on our backs for about 6 hours, and I still think they use that as the whole limit today for crews, which was enough time. So they finally let us out, and I figured, well, this is going to take them a few weeks to figure out. But we had some smart people that found out what the problem was, and sure enough, 2 days later, on April the 12th, we went in again. Now, some people over in Russia were saying that was just because we knew it was the anniversary of Yuri Gagarin's flight that we picked April the 12th, which is not true at all, but it just turned out that way. And I fully expected we were going to go down and count this thing down again and climb out of the vehicle. And George Page was launch director. Those of you who know George know he ran a strict launch control room. I mean, you didn't dare do anything untowards. In fact, during the count, I guess it was part of the coming out of the L-9 minute hole that George even strung the thing out a little bit longer and just trying to make sure everybody was calmed down and not getting too anxious. But again, I didn't think we were going to go. We hadn't started the APUs yet or anything. So count goes on down, and it got down to about 1 minute, I guess. About 1 minute to go, and that was when I turned to John and I said, I think we might do it. And about that time, my heart rate went up to over 130. John stayed down in a nice cool 90, which I've also heard that was what his heart rate was when he landed on the moon.
I was too old for it to go any faster.
But sure enough, we actually didn't, except for George's extending the hole a little bit longer, we went off right on time. Didn't have any other problems. And, you know, all of the other launch vehicles had kind of gotten up and lumbered a little bit, especially the Saturn V. Boy, when the shuttle, as you well know, when you light those solids, you're headed someplace. You just hope it's in the right direction. And my eyes were about that big, and I was sort of holding on. And it's the best thing I can liken it to. It's a little bit like a catapult shot coming off an aircraft carrier. It's about an extra G and a half, and so you get a nice solid push coming off the pad, and you do the big roll maneuver, which is all expected, and everything's going just fine, except we have this display on the computer that tells us what our trajectory is supposed to be, and we're going above it, quite a bit above it. And sure enough, it was part of what John was talking about earlier in the aerodynamics. The vehicle turned out to have more lift than what had been predicted. It wasn't really a problem from a performance standpoint. We weren't tight as far as performance was concerned. There was some shaking going on in the vehicle, but it wasn't a violent ride. But it was still exciting for a first-time guy. And then we got to the SRB burnout, and we'd been, you know, I guess we were hearing the noise of the structure, but it was noisy. It was shaking, and then all of a sudden it's gone. But there's supposed to be still 3 main engines burning back there, and I couldn't hear them, and I didn't feel them. The instruments told us they were still burning, though. But it got my attention there for a moment. But so from 8.5 minutes from sitting out on the pad out there to going 17,500 miles an hour, if folks over at Universal or Disney could duplicate that, they'd get a lot more visitors. It's one it is a heck of a ride. And John and I got up on orbit, and first thing, they didn't make John do it, but they made me take some medication because of this space sickness thing, and I was a rookie going up for the first time. So I was moving around slow, keeping my head oriented straight up, just so because the last thing I wanted to do was to get up and hurl in space on my first time up. But we got up, went back to open up the payload bay doors, and opened those up, and all of a sudden, looking back on the OMS pods, some stuff missing back there. Some of these tiles had managed to pop off during ascent. And we radioed that down to the ground. Truthfully, at least from my standpoint, I knew that all of the critical tiles had been pull tested back here, and that they hadn't pulled on those particular tiles because they weren't critical from a reentry standpoint. They were critical from a reuse standpoint. But I know there was lots of excitement going on back at Houston and probably here at KSC at that particular time over those, because if those are missing, then we got some on the bottom that are missing. Well, John and I didn't want to hear about that part because wasn't a darn thing we could do about it anyhow. But it was a great flight. I learned that important for my subsequent missions that the commander gets to sit or float and look out the window and take pictures, because as a PLT, I was busting my buns doing all kinds of stuff. But so I took advantage of that on my subsequent flights. I got lots of pictures, and I know John got lots of great pictures from STS-1. Coming in on entry after a little over 2 days, it's fantastic, beautiful. It's hard to describe. It was kind of a pink glow around the vehicle when we were still on the dark side, when the little ions started to get a little angry outside, but it wasn't a big fiery thing. Imagine first time, I think I said words to the remark when we first got in touch with the ground, that what a way to come to California, because it was an extremely awesome ride coming in. John took control of the vehicle around Mach 5, wasn't that right, John? Somewhere on that, and did a couple of the roll reversals to make sure the thing was flying right, and then flew around and he greased it on at Edwards, as only John can, and made a beautiful landing. It was certainly one of the highlights of my life, and
Highlight of my life is when Bob put the landing gear down.
I think John was backing me up just in case I screwed that part up.
That's right. We both got to push those buttons just in case.
just in case. But that was a kickoff of what's been a fantastic history for the shuttle. When you look back over its lifetime, it is a magnificent vehicle. Haven't built anything like it since, and I don't know if we ever will. We married putting up to 7 people in the vehicle, along with the largest cargo we could carry into orbit, and we've been able to do some fantastic things. You know, if you just look back over the flights we've flown, well, we don't do it anymore, but we put up some Department of Defense satellites that I can't talk about, but I tell you, I think they significantly contributed to us winning the Cold War. It was...
He just talked about it, didn't he?
I won't say anymore, they might shoot me. But they were very important. We did a number of other things from a planetary standpoint. Magellan going to map out Venus. Actually, we ended up with a better surface map of Venus for a while than we had of Earth, but then we corrected that by flying a synthetic aperture radar on board the shuttle and mapping the Earth's surface. Galileo has done some beautiful things around Jupiter and its moons. We also have learned more about the universe with satellites like Compton Gamma Ray Observatory, Chandra, and Hubble. Revolutionized what we know about astronomy, and we couldn't have done it without the shuttle. We're continuing to learn. We certainly building the space station, that couldn't have been done without the shuttle. It is a marvelous vehicle with what it can do, and continues to do. And you people are the ones that make it happen. You and thousands of others around the U.S. are really part of that program, and I know from my standpoint, it's been a pleasure to be a part of it, and I enjoyed working with each and every one of you, and hope to see many more flights out of the shuttle. Thank you very much.
You know, one of the things we say is that each and every flight of the shuttle is a test flight. I think the ultimate test flight was that first one, though. One heck of accomplishment. We have a great opportunity to be able to ask these folks some questions. So what we'd like to do is just open it up to the audience and have you ask them some questions if you have any.
Don't make them too hard, though.
Okay, I see somebody back here in the
Back
back.
up there.
We're on TV, folks, so wait
John
for
and
the
Crip, I'd first like to say you guys are legends. It's a pleasure having you guys back here at KC. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
And secondly, I'd like to ask you guys what kind of advice you have for NASA as we prepare for another era in the space program and going on to Mars.
John's the one that's the expert on that.
Well, for the past couple of years since I retired, I've been working on a crew exploration vehicle. I've been giving them a very lot of advice because, you know, we actually did go to the moon. And I think Dr. Gilruth is right. When we go back, we'll find out how difficult it was. Well, you talk to these folks and you give them advice, it's like talking to a wall. But I don't quit, so I'll keep giving advice, and we're going to make that crew exploration vehicle something that will carry people to the moon and haul people to Mars and be a reliable ascent, abort, and reliable entry vehicle with abort capability all the way to orbit and all the way back down, and we'll make that happen. Sure will. It's going to take a lot of testing and a lot of work and a lot of really interesting things that we've already done back in the Apollo programs, but we're going to have to do them all again with a new kind of vehicle and with modern electronics and stuff. Somebody showed me how many words of software was going to be in there. We went to the moon and came back with 36,000 words with, 3,000 words of erasable. And I don't want to tell you how many, but it's approaching 500,000 words to go to the moon this time. It must be more difficult. It's going to be a lot of fun anyway, and we'll give them advice. But I do believe that getting people off this planet and doing the things we have to do, developing the technology we need to live and work on, learn to live and work on the moon and on Mars, are the very technologies that will improve the life of people on this planet. For example, terraforming. Back in Houston, we've worked growing wheat. 38 bushel
They
acre.
also do that down at KSC, or I don't know.
Yeah, they've been doing it, but I mean, they've been growing wheat in Houston with adding CO2 and additional light and using these, these isolum seeds and stuff. They're going 45 days from seed to seed, and 38 bushels of wheat is a good crop. They're growing wheat at 1,000 bushels an acre. That'll revolutionize farming. They've even developed fertilizer made out of basalt stuff that will allow, it's regenerative fertilizer, and if you use that on your plants up and down the Mississippi instead of leaving the Mississippi off the edge of the Mississippi, which is, it's killing all the fish out there because they're dumping fertilizer in there, this stuff wouldn't do it. So it costs more to use it, but it saves the environment. And that's what we ought to be all about, looking at saving the environment for the future. I mean, what we're worried about right now is $3 a gallon gasoline, right? We're worried about that. Yeah, it's going to get worse. Well, it's 45 years from now, 2050. If India and China all want two cars in every garage, and there's a lot of them folks, the amount of fossil fuels required, according to Space Command, would be 900 million barrels of oil a day. Well, there isn't 900 million barrels of oil a day, so we got to look at other things. And the moon is one place to get them. I mean, Jack Smith's book says you can go to the moon and develop helium-3 and make uninterrupted reliable electrical power. But there's other people who know that you can go to the moon and send electrical power back to the Earth, like we were going to do back in the 70s with our big satellites in low Earth orbit, except they're aircraft carrier satellites, and you can send this stuff back to Earth, and it's reliable, unpolluting, and it comes back no matter what's happening to Earth. and there potentially bad things can happen. I mean, you know, you get a big asteroid in the Atlantic Ocean. I hate to say how low Florida is, but it ain't above 100 meters, and if you have better than 100-meter wave, everybody's going to be very bad off. And not to mention us kids in Houston, which is, I mean, I'm 10 feet above sea level right out there now, and so it's going to be bad things. So we have to learn to live with that kind of stuff and do something about it. We have to learn how to deflect asteroids and watch them and do all that kind of stuff. And of course, it's high-risk business. Living on Earth is high risk, too. We have to work it.
Surely we got some other questions out there.
Down here.
Well, I see, Crip, thank you very much for the comments regarding safety and reflecting back to STS-1 and also how it applies to us today. And when your morale gets low, one of the things that you two guys did during those early days with all of that testing, you were here and very visible at KSC. And when we were working a lot of those shifts, you were in the VAB, you were in the OPF, you were at the pad, you were in the firing room. And so one of those legacies, and that's, you guys set the bar for being very visible at the work site. So one of the things we appreciate you all coming back, even though it's 25 years, it's a silver anniversary, we still got hair, but we're still out here slamming away. So thanks to you two guys, and also, you know, the advice for the younger astronauts, just like you talked about these folks who are going to be here finishing the job that we started, but your advice to the new astronauts that are coming, when you do give that, tell them they need to come around and talk to the workforce at KSC.
We'll do it.
Okay, next.
Now, this group is not that bashful. I know too many of you.
We got one back here in the back.
What was it like
Landing on the moon? Well, we practiced a lot for that. We had a thing called the Lunar Landing Training Vehicle. And it'd come down, and you know, it had a jet engine in it. It would fly just, it had a software program in it that flew just like that, and you'd come down and land. And it didn't have but like, at the most 12 minutes of gas in it. So you had to come down real fast. And we practiced that a lot, and it worked great, and it just landed just like that on the moon. And we had actually more minutes. I had about 60 seconds of gas in my machine when I landed on the moon. Come down, land straight. You look out the window, you can see where you're going. You can fly like a helicopter. You don't need a radar altimeter because you can see the shadow coming down. You can tell how fast you're going. But, you know, it was no go with no radar altimeter. Landing on the moon was great. And we only knew area that we were landing into 20 meters. That's how bad our photography was. And now they're going back to Mars, and they're going to have the surface photography to centimeters. They must be a bunch of sissies. But anyway, you know, land on the moon, very straightforward because you could see what you're doing. And you like to use human beings in situations where if the automatic system, like the radar or something, fails, you can put human beings in the loop and go get the mission done. That's what pilot folks do. They can rendezvous and dock, and they don't need no radar altimeter or no guidance. They can do it backup, and that's what we ought to do.
That's what pilots were pilots.
Yeah, that's what you pay them for. In case the automatic system's not working, you just take over and keep right on trucking. Because, you know, if you're on the moon and you can't dock with something when you get off the surface of the moon and come back and you can't dock, well, you're going to be up there a long, long time. So you know, you have to back that kind of stuff up.
I don't know if some of you remember, it was on Apollo 16 when John and Charlie Duke were on the moon that Nixon gave approval for us to go build a space shuttle. And I think John had some appropriate remarks while he was on the surface at that time, but saying something like we needed to go build that vehicle.
Said we need that shuttle pretty bad. And I didn't really know what I was saying. But, you know, flying a wing launch vehicle, it was, we'd never thought about it. We didn't realize how complicated it was going to be, but it worked out. I'm telling you, it'll do things that nothing else can do. What else can haul 40,000 pounds to the space station and bring that much payload back? There's nothing can do it.
Got a question in the back?
Yeah, is it disappointing for y'all to see that the whole evolution of, say, a winged returnable vehicle is going by the boards in the interest of what, just absolute safety? I mean, is that required? It seems like we've come so far to go back to landing with parachutes in a desert in a capsule after, you know, Buck Rogers would have us, you know, landing like airplanes after all this time. Is that kind of disappointing after pioneering this?
You want to try that, John?
Well, I think it's really just building an escape system that'll work. That's what the Crew Exploration Vehicle is, a abort escape system that'll work. And I think for going back to the moon, if you want to go straight away to the moon, that's the best way to do it with an ascent launch vehicle. Because we talked about one time sending a space shuttle to the moon, but they're in a rocket big enough on the, we haven't built a rocket big enough to put that baby into moon orbit.
Yes, we paid a high price to see the shortcomings of it, even though it's an incredible vehicle. I mean, with the losses we've had in the terms of the program.
Well, flying in space is going to continue to be dangerous, whether you're flying it with a shuttle or a CEV or whatever they come up with next. I personally think it was remarkable being able to marry a large crew with the cargo and its capability on orbit. We couldn't have built a space station that we have now that we're assembling without something like the shuttle. But as John said, you don't want to take the shuttle going to the moon. That's just not the right way to do it. And all good things must come to an end. I'm not sure exactly when the shuttle will come to an end as far as utilizing it, but it has taught us some valuable lessons. And one of them is it's desirable to have some kind of crew escape system in it, and the shuttle was just not a vehicle to be able to do that. It has been a fantastic machine. You folks have done a super job of keeping it flying, and yes, we've learned some hard lessons, but from my standpoint, we haven't lost the last humans flying in space. If we continue to do it, it's going to happen again. It's part of the price that you pay.
One last question, folks. Right here.
Hi. What was the biggest surprise you had during the STS mission, either from an operational point of view or just experiencing the first reusable space vehicle?
Well, I'll mention a couple of them, the technical standpoints. Unbeknownst to John and I, when we lifted off, we broke a strut up in the nose of the vehicle that holds the forward reaction control system because the shock wave from the solids when they ignited bouncing off the mobile launch platform came back and socked the vehicle good. And consequently, we put in some water logs out there under the vehicle that were used for that, all the subsequent flights. I mentioned earlier we lofted above on trajectory because the vehicle had more lift. It also proved again, as John indicated, on landing. But as Chris Kraft said after we got back, we were infinitely smarter after we had flown the vehicle because essentially the system worked, and that was the most valuable thing I think that we got out of it, and that's why you do a test flight. John, you want to add anything to that?
I'm not sure what I was surprised about the most. I think maybe the surprise was that it worked so well as it did. I mean, we practiced in a simulator, and Neil Hutchison said we did 500 practice getting to orbit 500 times in the simulator, and we practiced and practiced and practiced. Everything worked. I was really surprised. And about 5 years ago, I learned, we looked at the bottom of the vehicle. About 5 years ago, I learned that they had a gap filler hanging loose out in front of the right-hand main landing gear, and hot gas got in the wheel well and buckled the right-hand main landing gear door. Well, you just can't get hot gas in your wheel well because that's where your hydraulic lines live and that's where your two big wheels are. So I think we're also very lucky, apparently, because when it happened, it must have happened so late that they didn't get much hot gas in there and it must have been a low flow. Thank goodness to that. That's a nice surprise to have 5 years, 20 years after you've flown.
Okay, John and Bob, thank y'all very much for sharing with us. What we'd like to do right now is I'd like to ask y'all to stand up and come over here. We have a little video that we want to show. Jim Kennedy couldn't be with us today, so he did tape a message, and he'd like to share some things with you and a dedication for you.
Thank you, Bill, and good afternoon to all of you, and welcome to this very special event. We are gathered here in the Launch Control Center right outside Firing Room 1 for a very special event. I think the two gentlemen next to me need no introduction, but in case you're a new employee, you might not know Norm Carlson, who stands to my immediate left, was the NASA test director for STS-1, and Bob Seek, most recently the launch director, was project flight engineer for the shuttle. Take it away, Bob.
Well, John and Crip, this is a tribute not only to you, but the whole KSC team that was part of the STS-1 effort. As you know, it took thousands of hours of work from dedicated men and women to pull off your mission. And expectedly, it took a lot of work here at KSC before we even had the privilege of processing the flight hardware. We were working at it for years, getting the facilities, the ground support equipment, and the tools together necessary to process the flight hardware. And it took a couple of years to get the flight hardware to the point where it could be committed for launch. Those men and women, they didn't have to have a highly visible job to be an important member of this team. Whether it was work done here in the control center for test checkout operations, or debugging all the software that we had to write for the automated programs, of course over in the orbiter processing facility, assembling Columbia and all that tile work that some of us remember, the work in the VAB on the external tank, the solid rocket motors, the engine shop, and of course all of the work on the facilities and ground support equipment. It was a marathon effort, and we always considered you to be members of the team also. You spent a lot of time here helping us with our test planning, a lot of time in the cockpit during test operations, and most importantly, on the floor with the workers that were putting out the high quality products. So you were the highly visible members of the team that we were all privileged to be members of, and this is a tribute to you and the whole team. We're doing this in the Launch Control Center next to Firing Room 1 because this is not only where all the test and checkout was performed, but where the launch team members were privileged to put the finishing touches on that great effort. Not surprisingly, the first time we went through the launch count, we scrubbed because of the proverbial glitch. We were used to that. We had a lot of unplanned holds and scrubs during our simulated launches leading up to that. So it was somewhat of a surprise the second time through that we made it right through to T0. Of course, we were ecstatic about that, and as they say, the rest is history, and that's best addressed by Norm Carlson.
Okay, we'll give you a little bit of the history of Firing Room 1. It was probably the most popular firing room during the Apollo era and continued to be so during the shuttle era. Of the four launches that stick to my mind was the very first Saturn V launch, which was in November of 1967. And it was launched only 10 months after the Apollo fire over on 34. Of course, the next one that comes to my mind is the Borman mission in December '68, which was an all-up mission, manned, that circled the moon. And the next one, of course, was Apollo 11. And Apollo 11, of course, was our first lunar landing. And then, of course, last but not least, the young Crippen mission, STS-1. I would say that the flight of STS-1, utilizing Firing Room 1, was probably the most daring flight that we had ever attempted to put in Earth orbit. And I say that because there was no other preceding flights that were unmanned. It was the very first flight. John and Bob got on and we flew. I think everybody had hold of their seats pretty tight. One story I like to tell has to do with John Young. I was in the Firing Room 1. I was briefing him and some other people, just in general how we operate the firing room. And when I got through, I said, John, I've got time. If you and your group would like to go to the pad, I'll take you to the top of the stack. And John said, no, I'm afraid of heights. Yes, Bob and John, it was a real pleasure in working with you all over the years. And there's no two people that's more deserving of this honor.
Thank you, Norm Carlson. Thank you, Bob Seek, for those touching memories of STS-1, the ultimate flight test. And now, John Young and Bob Crippen, it's our pleasure on behalf of all of your friends at the Kennedy Space Center to unveil a plaque commemorating your historic flight and your successes with NASA. Norm, Bob, if you'll unveil it, I'll read the inscription. You can see the STS-1 Columbia patch, and below it says, on the 25th anniversary of STS-1, April 12th, 1981, the first orbital test flight of NASA's Space Shuttle program, we proudly name Firing Room 1 the Young Crippen Firing Room, in tribute to John W. Young, Commander, and Robert L. Crippen, Pilot, dated April 2006. Congratulations, gentlemen, and if we could move behind us, we'll have one more unveiling to complete the ceremony here. You can see on the glass door leading into Firing Room 1, Norm and Bob are going to drop this, and you'll see that this room is indeed named the Young Crippen Firing Room. So again, to Bob and John, congratulations. It's a privilege for us at the Kennedy Space Center to share in your special day. Good luck. Back to you, Bill.
Well, again, folks, thank you, Bob. Thank you for coming, John. Thank you for being back here at the Kennedy Space Center. Folks, thanks everyone for coming out today. Y'all have a great afternoon.
Thank you. Thank you.
Good morning and welcome. I'm Mike Coates, Center Director at the Johnson Space Center. Today we celebrate the 25th anniversary of the STS-1 mission. Before we begin the program, I'd like to recognize some special guests. From our Texas delegation, Senator Hutchinson will be here, Congressman DeLay, and Congressman Culbertson. Nathan Cook from Senator Cornyn's office has also joined us. From our state legislature, we have State Senator Mike Jackson and State Representative Larry Taylor, and also County Commissioner Sylvia Garcia. From NASA headquarters, we have Administrator Mike Griffin, Associate Administrator Bill Gerstenmaier, and Shuttle Program Manager Wayne Hale. I'd also like to acknowledge the presence of George Abbey. George was a former JSC Center Director. At the time of STS-1, he was Director of Flight Crew Operations, so he was our boss. And I'd also like to welcome all the local officials and community leaders who have taken the time out of their busy schedules to join us for this very special event. And of course, a very special welcome to the STS-1 astronauts, John Young and Bob Crippen, and those of you that helped make STS-1 a success. I'd also like to welcome John's wife, Susie, and Cripp's daughter, Susan, with us here today. And a special thanks to all of you for your leadership and dedication to our space program. You know, 25 years ago, the whole world held their breath as the shuttle Columbia cleared the tower. Millions around the world watched for 8.5 minutes as Columbia sped to orbit. It was the first time, not only for a shuttle mission, but the first time we flew a spacecraft with humans on board on its maiden flight. I had the terrific honor of being the family escort during STS-1. And I'd like to tell you a couple experiences here. If I can embarrass Susie, I certainly will. You know, when the engines lit off and it cleared the tower and the sound finally bounced off the VAB and hit us on the roof of the LCC, it was deafening. All I could hear was Susie screaming. I was yelling. Notice real men don't scream, they yell. And we screamed for quite a while, I think. And then I looked over and saw Cripp's 3 daughters standing there, as calm and cool ice in their veins, showing absolutely no emotions. And when the shuttle was almost out of sight, the three of them turned and started walking off the roof first. And I said, "You can still see it." And I forget which one of you said, "It's okay, Dad's okay." Now, landing was really interesting 2 days later. After a perfect flight, we were out at Edwards waiting for John and Crip to come in the astronaut van. We were standing there with the families. When the bus pulled up, unfortunately the door was on the other side from where we are. Susie started running around one way. John jumped off the bus and started running the other way. And they kind of followed each other for a while. And I'm standing there watching them go by, thinking, I wonder if I should tackle one of them, get him to stop. Didn't seem proper to tackle the commander of the first shuttle mission and my boss, and it didn't really seem proper to tackle Susie either. Fortunately, John was in his pressure suit, and she eventually caught him. But that was a very special moment for all of us. 25 years, it seems like it was just yesterday. I could tell stories all day long, and in private I will tell you a lot of really good stories when Susie can't hear. But I would like to take this opportunity now to introduce the NASA Administrator, Mike Griffin. Everybody knows Mike has got a terrific technical background, PhD in engineering, a number of master's degrees, fantastic engineers. What you probably don't know is he's got an amazing encyclopedic knowledge of the history of the space program. Now, I've got a lot of space books at home in my library. I've read them all. The difference is he remembers everything he's read, and I certainly don't. But it's really entertaining to listen to Mike tell stories, remind people of when we launched on consecutive orbits during Gemini period, things like that. He just seems to recall this stuff easily. So it's a real pleasure for me to introduce the NASA Administrator, Mike Griffin.
Well, and welcome, Senator Hutchison. Thank you. Delighted to have you here. Well, I'm pleased to be here. I'm not pleased to be having to speak following Mike Coates, who's a silver-tongued devil, as you can clearly see, because I'm not, and having to follow that is just too difficult. I was struck by looking at this picture at the shock and surprise that they let such young guys fly the space shuttle on its first time. I mean, what were they thinking? But seems we got away with it. Mike and I were talking yesterday, and he was saying, well, do you remember what you were doing when STS-1 flew? And I said, yeah, vividly. I was working on Hubble Space Telescope, and these guys were flying my ride. I didn't have the privilege then of knowing John and Crip as I came to do in subsequent years. And so I wished them well, of course, but I was really thinking about what are we going to do if this doesn't work? So where you stand on something depends on where you sit, I guess, as it's an old saying. I was asked not too long ago what I thought about STS-1 being now administrator and looking back 25 years, and I still think what I thought at that time as an engineer. This is the boldest test flight anybody ever did. Boldest test flight in history. I haven't had reason to change that view. There are other candidates that you'd think about. The Wright brothers had a lot of guts, but they had at least flown gliders without the engines. And the guys who, Chuck Yeager broke the sound barrier, but he had gotten close in the same airplane before he broke it and had had many opportunities to explore the handling qualities of the airplane before he flew it. Apollo 8, first venture beyond low Earth orbit. Pretty bold step, but The spacecraft had been flown before with people in it. The spacecraft had been flown several times, had done high-speed atmospheric entries without people in it. We knew something about it before we flew it. When John and Crip got into STS-1, aside from the approach and landing phase of flight, and you had to think that they would be awful lucky to get to where that was the problem they had to deal with, the rest of it was all unknown. And it was as bold a step for the engineers who created it and the flight directors who said, let's go fly it, as it was for the astronauts who crawled into the cockpit. It was an incredible step, and it was incredibly successful. It was, we engineers don't believe in miracles, but if there are miracles, it was one. And the shuttle has gone on to service for 25 years, and it will serve the nation for another 5 before we retire it, with the respect due to the people and indeed to the machines that served us so well. The shuttle's a step along the way. It's one of the first vehicles that humans have created to learn how to sail the new sea of space. It's not the last vehicle. It's not even one of the last. It's not even in the middle. It's one of our first halting steps as we learn to leave the Earth and go new places. It's been an incredible learning experience for us, and we will take those lessons and apply them to a new generation of machines that will allow us to sail further for longer. So it's in that spirit today that I'm happy to be here. In fact, I'm thrilled to be here and to see that old video. And now it's my pleasure to introduce first Congressman Tom DeLay. I've said in other venues that our space program has had few, if any, better friends than Mr. DeLay has been. We will soon lose him in his capacity as Congressman Tom DeLay, but I think we will never lose him as a friend of the space program. Tom?
Thank you. Thank you, Mike. You did very well staying within the Hatch Act. Little inside joke for those of you. It is great to be with all of you today, especially today. And it's always an honor to come back and be with what I consider the real heroes of the future of this country. And before I get to the main thrust of my speech, I just want to once again recognize Administrator Mike Griffin for the work he's done, over the last year at NASA. And I just very quickly let some of y'all know he testified before our subcommittee a couple was it last week? I guess it was last week. My, how time flies. And he didn't know it, but he started a space race with China and Russia because we got our chairman all excited about the fact that we want America to stay the leader in the exploration of space, and we're fighting very hard to do that. Mike Griffin came on board at one of the most important and challenging times in the agency's history, and he also has, through his own work and his leadership of others, brought the best out of NASA, and that best includes bringing Mike Coates to lead the Johnson Space Center family. It's been an honor to work with both of them, and I look forward to working with y'all in new ways in the future. But I'm really proud of Senator Hutchison and the work that she has done on the Senate side, and being a real stalwart and working so hard to keep us first and keep us a leader of the world in space exploration. And we can't thank her enough. And my colleague John Culberson, who is going to take over for me because he serves on the right committees in the House, and we're looking forward to working with him because he's already shown his leadership capabilities in the future. As you know, 25 years ago, America and the world were introduced to a new generation of heroes and a new era of human imagination. The moment the Space Shuttle Columbia first launched into low Earth orbit, every other mode of space transportation was rendered obsolete. The shuttle was then and remains today the safest, most dependable, and most technologically advanced spacecraft in the world. And in the last quarter century, the shuttle has become a global icon of American ingenuity and American courage. And since Commander Young and pilot Crippen took the shuttle's maiden voyage, dozens of men and women, scientists, soldiers, and school teachers have followed them in NASA's mission to conquer the unknown. America is proud to have produced and honored to have welcomed home such heroes. Also in that time, 14 shuttle astronauts have been lost in the pursuit of that noble mission, men and women whose names we will always remember and whose valor we can never forget. Here in this part of the world, the space shuttle is more than a symbol. It's part of our community. The work that you do, you, the shuttle's engineers, astronauts, contractors, and designers, has been making us all proud for decades. You are the ones who have made this Space Center into America's laboratory of the impossible, and for 25 years have stretched both the technological capacity and the collective imagination of the whole human race, due in no small part to the successes you have designed and launched in the last 25 years. President Bush has once again called on the men and women of NASA to lead our nation on another giant leap for mankind. Congress has fully endorsed that vision in federal law. In the latest NASA reauthorization, in the budget, and in its annual spending bills. And with Senator Hutchison and Congressman Culberson, we are fighting hard to fully fund this agency because we are fully confident in this agency's people. Ladies and gentlemen, today is about you, the men and women who have come before and the men and women who will succeed you. For more than 25 years, even before the first launch, the shuttle program has been on the cutting edge of human ingenuity, and in order to accomplish the President's new vision for space exploration, you must spend the next 25 years doing it again. Representing you in the House of Representatives these last 2 decades has been one of my great honors, one of the great honors of my life. And I just ask you to keep up the good work. God bless you all, and remember, wherever NASA goes, greatness follows. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tom. That was very, very well said. Thank you. In fact, how would any of you like to have my job? I have to talk in between people, all of whom do it better than I do, and by a lot. It's now my privilege to introduce Senator Kay Bailey Hutchison, another of our space program's true friends. Senator Hutchison is knowledgeable about the program, knows the people, knows the machines, knows what we do, knows why it's important, and has been a steadfast supporter of this center, this agency, and frankly of me since I was confirmed a year ago. So with great pleasure, Senator Kay Bailey Hutchison.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Mike Griffin. Thank all of you who have created our space program and who will make sure that it is the best for years to come. I'm so pleased that astronauts Young and Crippen could be with us today, because all of us do remember where we were on April the 12th of 1981. It is one of those times when you realize that something major in the history of our country is happening before your very eyes. And I am so proud of their willingness to take the first step on a shuttle and to show what it can do. And thank all of you who were here then, who got us started. I'm excited about the future. Congressman DeLay and Congressman Culberson and I are here to make sure that America does continue our prowess in space. I cannot imagine, not for 1 second, that America would say, well, other countries are now going into space and they're going to put men in space and we'll step back. That's not America. We cannot cede our strategic position to any other country. We must maintain our defense and our economic advantage, and all of us will work together to make sure that happens. Congressman DeLay led the way to pass a resolution in Congress just this past week to commemorate the 25th anniversary, and what a great idea that was. Thank you for that and all the support that you have given to NASA. I introduced a reauthorization bill, which was the first one in 5 years. I got it through the Senate, and Congressman DeLay worked very hard to get it through the House. It was very important that we have that reauthorization bill. After the President put his vision for space exploration out there, I thought it was very important that Congress affirm that we are all going in the same direction, and that is exactly what Congress did. And it has some pretty bold initiatives in it. We support the vision of the President. We are in complete agreement on the value of manned spacecraft, of continuing the vision that goes to the moon and then to Mars. And Michael Griffin, you're going to lead the way. I think you speak a whole lot better than you admit, because you do happen to know the subject matter and you know the history and you just rattle it off. And that's exactly what we need at this time in our space program. The space shuttle is going to retire. It still has missions to complete. It is very important that we complete the space station. We have an international commitment, and we have a responsibility to make sure that we can do the research in space that is one of the very important reasons that we're going up there. And the space station is such an important part of that. We have to make sure that the advantage of research in a broad range of sciences, including science not directly related to exploration, is our goal. We must do the human tests on people in space. That is very important, but we also need to keep the scientific base. That's why we put in the NASA reauthorization bill the designation of the space station as a national lab. That means we can reach out and have other entities help with the funding for space research. We are now being creative in determining that we can go together with the National Science Foundation. We can certainly do work with the Department of Defense on other research projects that will stretch our space dollars further. So I am very excited about the support for the space program. But we will not be able to keep this enthusiasm without the enthusiasm of the public. And we all know that. The support for the nation's space program will be seen in the faces of youngsters who decide to make science a career because they see the exciting things that are being done as we explore the next generation of space. It is felt in the life of a friend that will be saved or improved because there are medical techniques or devices that have been developed as a direct result of research in space. Research that can't be done as well on Earth. It will come when researchers and scientists share their new discoveries and rewrite textbooks because of those discoveries. When we find applications for their discoveries that will be entire new industries and jobs for our future. America has never shirked from opportunity. America has never stood for second best. With brave men and women like John Young and Bob Crippen, like Sally Ride and Aline Collins, and leaders like Michael Griffin and Mike Coates, America will lead the way from the moon and on to Mars. That is our mission. We will succeed, and we need every one of you and the public to support that mission. We will make it happen. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you, Congressman. And I want to thank you especially for the authorization bill this year. If you haven't realized the importance of that authorization bill, for the first time in many years, the exploration program is in fact the law of the land and very clearly sets out what our course here is at NASA. Good morning. I'd like to welcome all of our guests here today. I'm looking forward to hearing their reminiscences about STS-1. I think everybody knows that 25 years ago today, we launched the first space shuttle. Columbia roared into a bright blue sky for the very first time. Some of you were there in Florida to watch that historic launch. Others of you were here at the Johnson Space Center as Columbia sped to orbit. The shuttle's first flight has been described as one of the greatest and boldest test flights ever flown. Its mission was to demonstrate the shuttle's safe launch and landing. There were an awful lot of firsts on that flight. We could spend most of the day talking about what was first on that flight. It was the first spacecraft to launch manned for the first time. It was the first spacecraft to have both liquid and solid rocket boosters. And of course, it was the first spacecraft to come back and land on a runway. John and Crip flew that flight, but the work and spirit of thousands of people here and across the country flew with them that day. The shuttle's planned to launch again in 2 months. That mission is still a great and bold test flight. And again, the work and spirit of you and this country will go with the crew. Each shuttle flight is both a test flight and a testament to the courage and pride of America. Columbia's first flight ushered in an era where intricate spacewalks, complex robotics, and flights carrying tons of satellites, observatories, and laboratories to and from orbit became commonplace. Women, scientists, and engineers from all races and from many nations joined the corps of astronauts who had risked their lives for space exploration. The shuttle's achievements have come at a difficult cost. America and the world mourned the loss of Challenger in 1986 and of Columbia in 2003. But the NASA family is in the exploration business. Risk and a learning process that never ends are part of that. NASA returned to flight following those accidents, resolved to be smarter, stronger, and safer, and the world cheered. Great moments in space exploration await us. Soon our work and our spirit will launch a new generation of spacecraft back to the moon, this time as a stepping stone to places beyond. We will build on the legacy that John and Crip have left us. I want to introduce Milt Heflin, who will be our moderator, if you will, for our panel here today. Milt is a veteran of Apollo, Soyuz, and Skylab. And of course, he's a flight controller for the first 9 shuttle missions. He was a flight director for 20 shuttle missions. He was a lead flight director for 7 flights, including the first Hubble Space Telescope servicing mission, and 3 missions that deployed planetary probes from the shuttle that went to Venus, Jupiter, and the Sun. Now, Milt is also from Edmond, Oklahoma, where my wife's family is from. Over the years, I've learned that if you don't understand what Milt is saying, ask my wife. She'll interpret for you. So if it doesn't make any sense today, she'll stay afterwards and tell you what he was talking about. Milt, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Diane, maybe you better come up here and we'll just interpret as we go to save time if you... Okay, you're not going to come up here, right? STS-1 was a new beginning. 25 years later, that's today, is also a new beginning. The vision of space exploration starts with using this warhorse of ours, the space shuttle, getting it flying again to continue the assembly of the International Space Station, which is something that bonds nations together, if you stop and think about it, for a common cause. And perhaps, it's been discussed some today, but perhaps if it works out right, the space shuttle may be able to make one last glorious return to service the Hubble Space Telescope, as only the space shuttle can. And that would be allowing us mortals here on Earth to see what has never been seen before, to continue to see what has never been seen before. Which, if you stop and think about that, we're looking at the visions of the future of mankind's continuous journey of discovery. And that is what it's all about. First of all, I'd like to ask those of you in the crowd that worked STS-1 specifically, you were here working in some manner supporting STS-1. Would you please stand?
Bill, let me interrupt.
You bet, Bob.
My family here in the front seat, and they were with us on STS-1. My wife.
Would y'all please stand up?
Georgia, thank you. They were all with us.
Well, that's great. I know the granddaughters weren't here, but I really like granddaughters because I have two of them. Would those of you who are working space shuttle today or for sometime during the past 25 years please stand up? All right. Now, in front of you today, to my left, are also a group of people that have been involved in space shuttle work as well, as you can imagine. Let me say just a few words about each one of them, and then we're going to turn this over to each one to make some comments. Right to my immediate left is Bob Thompson. Bob was the space shuttle program manager during STS-1, and by the way, he took this thing. STS-1 was about the 11th year, I believe, of the work that he had started to get us ready for STS-1. And I'm sitting next to a member of the original Space Task Group at Langley in 1958, when this business of manned space flight was first conceived to go do. And I came to work here in 1966, in June of '66, and I reported to the Landing and Recovery Division. And Bob Thompson was a division chief at that time. Well, he was the division chief of the Landing and Recovery Division. I think he knew I was coming in June because he left that job in April to take over the Skylab, become a Skylab program manager. It's Bob Thompson. If we could go down here towards the other side of the group here, I'd like to introduce Aaron Cohen next. Aaron, at the time of the space STS-1, was the orbiter project manager. Of course, a number of you will remember that Aaron was also a former center director here at the Johnson Space Center. And today, Aaron is a professor emeritus of mechanical engineering at Texas A&M University. Aaron Cohen. And sitting next to Aaron's left, to your right there on the end of this, is Neil Hutchinson. Neil was the STS-1 Ascent Flight Director. He also served as a flight director during Apollo, Skylab, Apollo-Soyuz missions. And since 1989, working for Science Application International Corporation, SAIC, where today he serves as Senior Vice President for Space, Earth, and Aviation Sciences Business Unit. And I had the great privilege of serving in Neil's back room on the Ascent team as a flight controller. Neil Hutchinson. Two folks left here for me to introduce. They really don't need any introduction, but and Bob Crippen, right over here. Bob, of course, was the PLT, the pilot on STS-1. He also commanded 3 other space shuttle flights, known as Crip. And the last one I want to talk about here before I turn this thing over is the one shaking his head. By the way, I've been trying to take over his, I like turtleneck sweaters, by the way, and John's not around much anymore, so I'm trying to move into wearing one in his honor as many times as I can. Plus, I'm cold-natured, I think. But you talk about a space veteran. This man has flown in Gemini, Apollo. He's walked on the moon. And it's interesting, today over Space Center Houston, they talked about the fact that, talk about his launches and landings. When you count his launches and landings, you need to remember that there was a landing on the moon and a launch from the moon that you can add to his launches and landings. And I had the great pleasure, like I said, I was in Landing Recovery Division back during Apollo days, and so I refer to him quite often when I see him as my favorite John Young. But John Young and I got on aircraft carriers a slightly different way back in the Apollo days. I was on the USS Princeton in the Pacific on the splashdown of Apollo 10, which was one of John's missions. Brought him aboard there in the Pacific. And then Apollo 16, I was on board the USS Ticonderoga working for Landing Recovery when John and his crew splashed down in the Pacific. So that's several reasons why he's my favorite John Young. John Young, Bob Crippen. Now my job is to turn it over to these guys and let them start talking and maybe to referee some or watch the clock or whatever. We'll just see how it goes. But we're wanting to hear from them now. So I'm going to turn it over to start with to Bob Thompson and Aaron Cohen together. And gentlemen, quite frankly, if anything feels natural to say at the time, I just suggest you do that. So Eric, you're going to have to keep track of these mics and get everybody tuned in. Bob, Aaron, Bob.
Okay. When I came here this morning and Milt came up, I said, Milt, do you want the truth or you want color? And he says, color. So I now have about 5 or 6 minutes to talk about 11 years of design work. So I'm going to have to stick with color. I think probably the most important design decision we made in shuttle was to not build the 2-stage fully reusable system. That system had been conceived by the advanced planning groups, which are permanent groups within the NASA centers. And these people are very talented. They do a lot of what I call view graph engineering. And it's awfully easy to put a view graph up of a huge booster that has 10 rocket engines in it, about 8 air-breathing engines, 400-foot wingspan, big internal tanks holding very cold propellant, and it's just a little airplane on the thing. But when you sit down, when they actually set up a program and say, you're going to be the program manager, and you start looking at that, and you say, well, if that doesn't work, I'm going to get fired, you begin to think a little bit about, do you really want to build something like that? I remember we were in the fairly early phases debating whether we should build that configuration or something else. Buzz Aldrin, after he had come back from his flight to the moon, had traveled around the world and finished his public relations duties, was assigned to be the coordinator between the astronaut office and the program office. So he used to come to my 8 o'clock Monday morning staff meetings. And one Monday morning after staff meeting, Buzz hung around, and he came in and says, Bob, I really think you ought to go unmanned on that booster. I knew what they had been talking about, getting in a booster and flying it up to 12,000 feet per second, and then sending the orb on its way and turn around and bring that big airplane back in from 12,000 feet per second. At that time, we had experience with the X-15 up to about 4,000 feet per second. And the astronauts sort of thought maybe going unmanned would be a good idea. So I looked at Buzz and sort of grinned and said, Buzz, you know, I agree with you, but I want to really do you one better. I think we ought to get rid of that damn booster. So we evolved. When we started the Phase B design work, we ran a competition. We had two winners among the competition. Rockwell won one contract, McDonnell Douglas won another. We were managing Rockwell out of Houston. They were managing McDonnell Douglas out of Marshall. The Marshall people, of course, weren't interested in getting rid of the booster. But here we began, and the losers in that competition, NASA decided to give those people a level effort contract to keep them active so they could bid the actual design development, which would come later. So we had Grumman working for us. And one of the systems engineers came to see me one day and said, well, we won't give Grumman the job to do. And I said, we're going to have the prime contractors do the two-stage fully reusable system, but ask Grumman to look at what it would mean to the shuttle if we took the propellant out. Because a vehicle like this, when it lifts off the launch pad, even if it's a two-stage vehicle, 80-some% of the weight is propellant that you have to burn in the next 8 minutes. If you put that outside the shell of the airframe and put it in a rather simple tank like we had in Apollo, and you can get rid of that tank, boy, I tell you, it makes the airplane you have to build look like something that you might put your reputation on and maybe not get fired if it doesn't work. Anyway, we evolved into what you now know as the Space Shuttle, and from time to time I'm asked, who designed the Space Shuttle? And most people want the answer says, oh, this particular genius sat in a restaurant one night and after 2 bottles of wine, he pulled out a napkin and he sketched out the Space Shuttle and handed it to me and we went off and built the Space Shuttle. Well, the world doesn't work that way. So I tell them, no, the Space Shuttle evolved out of a bureaucracy led by the government, supported by people around the country and academia and other places, and supported under contract by the aerospace industry. And after you have 10 meetings a week, and you work about 2 or 3 years, and you evolve from one thing to another, lo and behold, if you stick with it, a shuttle will sit on the launch pad someday, and you'll find 2 guys kooky enough to willing to get up in the cockpit. And you can walk out there with a match and light that thing off, and if enough of your family stand around pushing, it'll go. And that's kind of what got us there. Now, I want to finish on a kind of an amusing note. As we were evolving this design, my secretary came in one day and said, there's a Kelly Johnson wants to talk to you on the phone. Well, I knew who Kelly Johnson was. These people may or may not. Kelly Johnson was the engineering manager of the Lockheed Skunk Works. And those people were building the most creative airplanes that this country was building at that time. Maybe it wasn't quite as creative as what we were doing on the shuttle. It was pretty creative. They were building an airplane that could fly at that time at 100,000 feet, could fly at Mach number 3, had a lot of heating problems, had a lot of problems of keeping the tanks from leaking and this sort of thing. And I said, oh, I wonder what the hell Kelly wants. So I picked up the phone, and he said, Bob, are you going to be on the West Coast anytime soon? I said, well, Kelly, as a matter of fact, I've got to come out to Rocketdyne next week. He said, well, how about coming by to see me down here at Santa Monica, my place? The Skunk Works is a highly classified area, and it's clear to me Kelly didn't want to talk anymore. He says, you got a problem on that shuttle you're designing I'd like to talk to you about. That's all he'd say, and I didn't want to question him further with the classification, so I hung up the phone. The whole weekend I worried, what the hell Kelly got. He's run into some very sophisticated aerodynamic problem at Mach 3 that we don't know about. Or he's got some heating problem we don't know about. So I got the rocket down, finished my business. I dropped down to Santa Monica, check into the highly secured place there. Kelly comes out, takes me back to the conference room. He's got a couple of his systems engineers sitting around the table. And they got a view graph projector sitting in the middle of the table on the screen. After introductions all around, Kelly turns to this fellow standing next to the view graph and says, "Tell him what you got." And I was waiting for the shoe to fall, some real problem we wouldn't be able to solve. So the guy puts up a picture of the shuttle orbiter sitting on the runway in a distinct nose-down condition. And he says, "You're not going to be able to take that airplane off the runway." Boy, I'm telling you, the sun came out, and I wiped the smile off my face, and I said, "Well, we understand that." He says, "If those trailing end flaps and that low aspect ratio wing, you'll never make that thing take off." And I said, "Well, we understand that, but we never intend to take it off." He said, "What the hell you mean you never intend to take it off the runway?" I said, "Look." So then I went through carefully and explained, and we had just made the decision to take the air-breathing engines off and not put the kit we put on for flying around. The shuttle is a very poor airplane to fly from point A to point B in the atmosphere. So we decided, as you saw in this picture, to put it on the back of a 747. And so when I explained all that to him, I remember this day the fellow giving the briefing said, "I'll be damned." So that's my colorful story. I'll be damned. I'm going to turn it over to Aaron Cohen. One final thing. Aaron and I were invited to give the Smithsonian Von Karman lecture a few years ago. And I spent maybe an hour telling about all the different design problems we solved. And Aaron then took an hour talking about all the orbiter things that were solved, talking about vacuum-bonded titanium truss structures and this sort of thing. In 6 minutes, he's not going to be able to tell all of that. So, Aaron, I'm going to turn it over to your color.
It's really wonderful to be with you today to mark this anniversary, 25th anniversary of STS-1. When I look back, which I do frequently, I have time to spare, and I look back frequently, I think about all the wonderful people, many of them stood up here today, that made this happen. It was really a great group of people that made that happen. I immediately think of the people at the Johnson Space Center, but as Bob Thompson mentioned, there were other people involved. We had a wonderful team at headquarters. We had a great team at other centers. And, of course, we had a wonderful contractor team that put this together and made this happen. I think you ought to think about something that I feel and I've come to realize is very important. We were extremely fortunate. We were fortunate in that we were able to take our concepts, our thoughts, our visual aids, then it was view graphs, today it's PowerPoint, whatever it may be, and turn that into a flying machine. And that is a wonderful feeling and a wonderful career to have been able to do that. Most of us that stood up today, most of the people here worked on STS-1, came off the Apollo program. We are extremely fortunate to work on the Apollo program. We came off the Apollo program full of knowledge, full of understanding of how we did things, but soon we recognized that we had a completely different challenge, or a bigger challenge on the shuttle. It was reusable, it was a launch vehicle, a spacecraft, and an airplane, and it had systems on it that we were not familiar with, that we at the space program were not familiar with, like the hydraulic system, like the auxiliary power unit, like tires, like brakes. So we really had to understand things a little bit differently than we did in Apollo, especially the reusability and the turnaround time. As the Orbiter Project Manager getting ready to fly this vehicle, I was consumed with understanding the cost, the schedule, and the weight. Weight was always a serious problem, and I'm sure weight will be a serious problem on whatever venture you do in space. Weight will always be a serious problem. There were technical issues, and I can mention a few technical issues, but I'm sure I'll leave some out. But some that stick in my mind, as you might recognize, are the auxiliary power unit. First time we were going to fly an auxiliary power unit on the shuttle. We had large payload bay doors made out of graphite epoxy, which is the first time we had a large composite material. We, of course, had the famous problem of the tiles, of putting the tiles on and getting them to stay on. And, of course, we had the avionics system, the multi-computer, synchronized computer avionics system, which we had to build here at the Johnson Space Center, basically another vehicle in the Shuttle Avionics Integration Laboratory. So we had those type of problems that faced us and many, many more. I could go on all day, as Bob Thompson said, and talk about the problems we had, and each one of you out there helped solve those many, many problems. Let me talk about one problem in an anecdote format, which I had listed to talk about. You saw a picture of it when they talked about flying the orbiter on top of the 747, and Bob Thompson alluded to it. Let me tell you a story about that. I was the Orbiter Project Manager, and Bob had relegated to me at that time to do some of the systems work. And several people from the Johnson Space Center came in to see me and said that, and they were very good. A couple of them you saw, John Kiker, Owen Morris, Dick Kalana, came in to see me and said that, Aaron, flying the orbiter back from Edwards Air Force Base to Kennedy, changing out, putting air-breathing engines on, putting the landing gear, new landing gear on, and doing in-flight refueling was really not a very sensible way to go. We really need to put it on top of the 747. And that got my attention. I looked at him, I said, that is the dumbest idea I've ever heard of in my life. I said, how could you ever bring me that idea? Well, it turns out, as you might recognize, these were very, very tenacious people, and of course they were also had another characteristic. They were world-renowned model airplane builders. These people could build a model airplane in such high fidelity. So you saw they did that. They built a model airplane and demonstrated how you could actually separate the orbiter off the 747. And that's what we wound up doing. But I had to, you might say, eat crow when I told them that was the dumbest idea I ever heard of. And that is a true story. We also have to think about the heritage we had at the Johnson Space Center. People like Robert Gilruth, Max Vijay, Chris Kraft, and George Lowe. They were great people that left us a heritage that we were able to work with. I had the opportunity, after I retired from NASA, to teach at Texas A&M University and teach some very outstanding young people, men and women. And my greatest hope for them was that they would be able to have the same opportunity I had in being able to turn their concepts and their thoughts into a flying machine. And it sounds like, from what I hear, you're often doing that, and I applaud you and I wish you all the best. There are going to be problems along the way. You're certainly going to be faced with weight problems, schedule problems, and cost problems. But I think with the tenacity you have, with the heritage you have, you'll be able to do that. So let me end as I started. I want to thank each and every one of you for all the support you provided to the program to make this a great event. Thank you very much.
Okay, Neil, we'll turn it over to you and your thoughts, and then you can turn it over to Bob and John.
Well, terrific. Morning, everybody. Hard to believe it's been 25 years. Awful lot of things have happened in those last 25 years, but you know, when you look back on where we were with the program and with the flight operations folks 25 years ago, or really 30 years ago, or 35 years ago, kind of reminds me of where you folks are today. You know, we were finishing up shuttle. We had some other things to do, namely Skylab and Apollo-Soyuz. The shuttle design was underway, so we were still flying vehicles, and there was a whole group of people off trying to get this newfangled thing going. And that's very similar to what you're faced with today. You've got shuttle to finish up. You've got to finish the station, and in the meantime, there's going to be a whole bunch of you who are very, very seriously engaged in this new adventure called CV. So I think what you're going through today, in my retrospective look, is not much different than what we did. And when you look at the flight operations framework, you have a little bigger challenge, because we had a really nice break. And somebody mentioned this morning in a press conference, one of John's comments was someone asked him about you endorse having a gap between flights, and John very correctly said absolutely not, and I hope there isn't one between shuttle and CV. Well, we had a pretty good sized gap. We didn't start out that way, but Mr. Thompson, Mr. Cohen had a few problems that they had to deal with, and we thought we could spend about 3 years getting ready for STS-1, and we finished Apollo-Soyuz in 1975, and almost immediately started the learning process to bring the MOD folks up to snuff on what they were going to be faced with. And time went on, and we started simulating, and of course 3 years turned into 6 years before we finally got in the air, but we did finally get in the air. And during that time, we ran an awful lot of simulations. I think something Milt probably can attest to this. I think we ran about 500 plus launch simulations over a period of about 3 years, and I think 499 of them we aborted. Of course, and then the real thing, the real one went like a charm. It's kind of interesting. The simulating system at JSC was pretty crude when we started. As a matter of fact, I think the simulator crashed a lot more than the shuttle did. But by the time we finished, they could do just about anything. As a matter of fact, anytime, I don't think she's in the audience, but Ann Ackla was one of the major players in training us. She could bring the crew and the control center to their knees anytime she felt like it, and usually did once every week or so, just to make sure we behaved well. But we did use the time well, and then we got to the flight, and you know, I often wonder what would have happened if somebody would have had an EKG on me. I know John and Kripp were just kind of sitting there saying, well, okay, let's get this on. And I'm certainly glad they didn't have one on me, because I probably would have never been let back in the control center again. But we launched, and you know, the launch was kind of uneventful except for the firsts. And people have mentioned them here before, and good grief, you know, every microsecond that vehicle flew farther, we were into another first. First time we'd ever had the SRBs and the mains hooked together. First time we ever throttled an engine down at altitude. First time we got through Max Q, got rid of the SRBs, and yes, Ivy did scream, and so did Max Paget, by the way, who was in the control center when the SRBs finally jettisoned. And of course, we got on orbit and opened the payload bay doors, and everybody, and another thing Aaron mentioned, you know, they were a really, really big piece of gear, and of course in zero-G things don't weigh much, but how that composite structure was going to react had everybody worried. We opened the doors, and everybody heaves this big sigh of relief, and then Kripp's looking out the back window and says, uh-oh. And the TV cameras pointed at the home spot, and we're missing a tile. And of course, that is the story of STS-1. We spent the rest of the flight making sure that we didn't have any other tiles missing in critical places, and fortunately we didn't. And the 2 days, we were only up there 2 days. It seemed like 2 hours. They just flew by. And then we went into the entry sequence, and of course that also was uneventful, but again, just a great number of firsts. mixed aero pilots, mixed aero and propulsive autopilots, landing on the runway, wheels, brakes, all that kind of stuff. And finally, when the orbiter rolled to a stop on the dry lake bed, everybody in the control center the place just erupted. And somebody said this earlier this morning, kind of stole my line, but I'm going to say it again because we were all standing around the flight director console, and everybody was patting everybody on the back, and all of a sudden you hear this banging on the window on the VIP room, and you folks remember the VIP room in the old control center. And here's Dr. Kraft standing there, and he's holding up a little 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, and he's got the famous words written on it: "We just got infinitely smarter." And in my mind, that represents what STS-1 was all about. It was absolutely, we got infinitely smarter. And we reveled in that success for about a day, and then we got started off on STS-2, which, by the way, was the first time for the second time. And we had never done that before, and having this vehicle and proving that it was really reusable was a serious challenge. And of course, we went on to, you all have gone on to fly it many, many times. I guess by way of comment, as Aaron said, I look at these the last 25 years, and quite frankly, and I'll bet you every one of these guys would say the same thing: I never had a better job, ever. And you should take advantage of what you've got here. And you're in a position where you are exactly where we were 30 years ago, where you've got a brand new toy coming on board in the form of the CV and all its piece parts. And there is nothing better than working through one of these things, getting it built, and getting it in the air. And we wish you all the luck in the world. And I'm sure that with the folks that are here at the Johnson Space Center and Marshall and in the industry, that all of you are going to have to pull on the oar, that you'll absolutely be successful, and we all need you to be. Thank you.
Well, I guess it's my turn. I would like to thank all of you for coming out today. Great crowd. I was really pleased to see the number of you that stood up, that supported STS-1. I look out and I see a lot of familiar faces. Most of us, our hair is a little grayer, a little less, so I guess it has been 25 years ago. It was a fantastic event. Thinking with Neil talking, I was a support astronaut, Capcom, back when we were doing Skylab, and when we finished it up, I started working on shuttle requirements and that sort of thing. Truthfully, Bob, I really thought that one of the jobs I might get was to fly that big return booster that I didn't figure they would let me go fly on the orbiter, but they might let me fly it back to the base or something. And then it went away, so I wasn't sure what was going to happen. It took us a while, but it was in 1978. I was out walking around the Enterprise, sitting on the back of the 747, and we were flying it through here for some reason, I forget why. And I was walking around with George Abbey, who was the director of flight crew ops at that time. And George turned to me and said, "Crip, how'd you like to go fly the first one?" And I think I was doing handsprings on the tarmac out there at that point. You know, John Young, I mean, he was the most experienced guy we had in the office. Plus, he was the chief of the astronaut office, so he was a logical one to go fly on the first flight. I think everybody anticipated that was going to be the case. Of course, being the chief of the astronaut office, he also got to pick who was going to go fly on the first flight. Now, why they picked a rookie like me, I never figured out, but I appreciated John. I'll always remember that opportunity. It's one that'll stick around with me forever in my mind. And then getting to train with an old pro like John for all the time we had to train. You know, it was mentioned here, we did have a few few technical problems prior to going flying. The main engine seemed to blow up out at Stennis every time we put one on the test stand. That wasn't a very good idea. And then we flew Columbia into Kennedy, got it there in '79, and it ended up arriving with less tiles than what it had left Palmdale with, which was helping us know that we needed to correct that problem. They sent Kenny Kleinkeneck and Bob Overmeyer down to the Cape to hopefully get that corrected. And I've told this story many times that, we had a lot of people in the astronaut office lined up ready wanting to go fly the shuttle, but they couldn't fly till John and I got out of the road. And several of them were saying instead of young and crippin', it was going to be old and crippled by the time we got there. And it felt like it, but thank goodness folks like Aaron and Bob here said, hey, we need to fix those problems before we go fly, and they put the right amount of attention to them. And finally, it was time to do it in '81. Of course, we counted down on April the 10th and ran into a problem that befuddled me because the backup flight computer couldn't track the primary, and we had not seen that problem before. And John and I went in, were on a hole. We were strapped in on our backs for about 6 hours that time, and I think that still was used as a limit for how long the crew should be strapped in before we finally gave it up for the day. We went back out on April the 12th after some smart people had solved the problem, and I fully anticipated we were going to do the same thing again. We were going to go count, run into a problem, have to go back, and that we'd do that a number of times before we actually flew. And it was only when the count got inside of 1 minute that I turned to John and said, I think we might do it. And Neil, they did have me monitored. My heart rate went up over 130. I was surprised it didn't go any higher. John was nice, cool self as always. But when those solids lit, well, obviously I figured we were headed someplace. I just hoped it was in the right direction. It was a nice kick in the pants, and first stage on the solids was a pretty dramatic ride. It was not the slow lumbering takeoff like we had back in with the Saturn V. The shuttle gets up and scats. But it wasn't long after liftoff that we had a little on our CRT, the trajectory that is supposed to be flying, and we're going above it. We're not flying the path that we're supposed to be flying. Which we talked to the ground about a little bit, but it turned out that the vehicle had more lift than what we'd anticipated. It also turned out, unbeknownst to us, that we had broke a strut up where the forward RCS is. On liftoff, the shock wave of the solids bouncing off of the mobile launch platform coming back on the vehicle was more than what we'd anticipated, and we had to correct that later with some more water deluge apparatuses to absorb some of the energy. First stage on the solids last 2 minutes. And again, it was kind of shaking, and it was loud. Even through the helmet, you could get the noise. And then we got staging, when all these folks down there were applauding, and I thought all the engines had quit. The solids were gone, and there wasn't any noise. It was about as quiet as it is in this room, and there wasn't any shaking going on. But thank goodness the instruments confirmed the engines were still going. And so I had the ride of my life. Actually, the 8.5 minutes seemed more like 2 minutes. It was all encompassed. It was only on subsequent flights that I could fully appreciate the full aspects of ascent. And during ascent, we had these little things coming off the external tank. Looked like popcorn to me, but there was foam coming off at that point. On orbit, getting a chance to look back at the Earth, get her float around in 0G. They made me take scope decks before I took off because I was afraid I would get this space sickness and upchuck all over the cockpit. So I was moving around real slow, trying to stay heads upright so I didn't do anything. So then I floated back to the back, and we opened up the payload bay doors. And as Neil pointed out, as soon as I opened them, it was obvious we were missing some tiles back off the OMS pods. But truthfully, I knew that we had really done pull tests on all the tiles that were critical for re-entry, and those were only there for a reusability standpoint. So those weren't critical. And I was fairly confident the ones that we really needed, the ones on the bottom of the vehicle, were still there. The biggest anomaly we had on orbit was that the potty broke. And that was probably the first of numerous times, and I had the rubber glove on, and never mind. It was ugly. But but then re-entry time came, and the vehicle flew beautifully. When we were still on the dark side of the Earth, outside started to turn pink. It was a nice soft pink, about like these exit signs that you see on the side. It wasn't a big fiery kind of a re-entry. It was a nice soft glow, but it was obvious it was a little warm outside on the nose of the vehicle. And then daylight came and you couldn't see the pink anymore. When it got to be a little less than Mach 7, John took over the controls of the vehicle and did a couple of roll reversals just to make sure the thing was flying right. And then he brought it on into to Edwards with great landing. And he said my primary job was to make sure the landing gear got down, which I attended to. Some people say too late, but because they don't like us putting them down that low. But it was, again, a fantastic flight. Looking back on 25 years, I think the video did a good job of summarizing what's transpired during that 25 years. It's allowed us to do some fantastic things, and I know that we'll get the thing flying again this summer, and it's going to continue with the assembly of the International Space Station, and I certainly hope, like Milt said, that we'll give another visit to Hubble. It is a super vehicle, and it was my honor to have an opportunity to be a part of it. John?
Well, I agree with everything Crip said. My heart rate wasn't as fast as his on liftoff, but I'm so dang old it just wouldn't go any faster. And it's wonderful to fly into orbit and have no problems like we had. We had some anomalies like the tiles. I found out about 5 or 6 years ago that we actually had hot gas come into the right main landing gear door and buckle the right main landing gear wheel well, and I didn't know that. Of course, that's bad because that's where our 3 hydraulic systems and those 2 big tires live. You don't want to overheat those guys. So it was a lot of fun on that mission, and it worked out very well. I tell you, it was a really remarkable machine, and I appreciate everything everybody did to test it. We, like Chris said, we just got instantly smarter when we got back. There were a lot of things we learned, like Crip talked about us pitching up on liftoff because we didn't know the normal forces, and we didn't know the plume effects of the big 3 million pound solid rocket motors. We just didn't know that, so we got better going uphill. And going downrange, the thrusters were amazingly quiet. I agree with, and the strange thing was a fella come into me about Dave Gilbert come into the office when we were in quarantine over here in building 5, and he says to us, he says, we don't know if we fix this problem with the reaction control system. The software has been making it fire inadvertently throughout the mission, and you can use 600 pounds of reaction control system gas in several minutes. And so we hit orbit, and the main engine stowed, and the big engines are like this, and they weigh 8,000 pounds apiece. So as soon as the engine stowed, with dead bands being what they were, the reaction control system started firing like crazy, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, Dave was right, and start reaching up to throw off the reaction jet drivers, which is very hard to do when you're wearing a pressure suit and you can't raise your head. So you have to know where the switches are. There are about 2,000 switches and circuit breakers and a vent indicator in the space shuttle, and you have to know every one of them. Like, does anybody in here know what the in, open, out, close switch does? I bet you don't. Well, that's the kind of stuff we had to know. And when you punch the computer, Crip worked on all the software, and he got it just right. And there's 110 pages of software in that rascal. And so, you know, you punch something and punch this and punch that, and if you didn't do it just right, you could make the vehicle stop flying. So you had a lot of program notes where you wasn't supposed to touch the computers. Yeah. So we paid attention to those kind of program notes real carefully. And it was a lot of fun flying in zero gravity up there because you could float all over the vehicle and go anywhere you wanted to and see a lot of stuff. And those big payload bay doors have shielded a lot of new things, but we were really nervous because we didn't know if they would close okay. And So we opened and closed them twice on orbit. We tested out every system on the vehicle, the reaction control systems, the orbital maneuvering systems, the elevons and ailerons, and we did ops control checkouts, and all the kinds of things you have to do to check the vehicle out. And when we got it all checked out, then we buttoned it up for entry, and, you know, we aligned the inertial measurement units with using the star trackers, and we had backup things where we could align them manually. And it really worked well because the vehicle was really in good, perfect alignment, and it brought us back and brought us into the heading alignment circle us around. We got TACAN updates when we were supposed to, which we were all surprised to get it all. We didn't realize the TACAN would work way over the horizon like it did. And it was really an amazing flight, and we was really proud to complete it. And I think the good old space shuttle has been an absolutely incredible thing that's given us. It costs a lot of money to fly it, but the memory, the information we've got from the payloads, good old telescopes, and all the things that we put up there, the ComSats, and all the things. And Crip says he thinks the DoD payloads, which I don't know anything about, but he knows a little something about. He thinks the DoD payloads helped us in the Cold War. Well, I don't know. You know, if that's what it really did, it paid for the space shuttle time and time again. Plus the new knowledge about how our solar system works, it's paid for the shuttle time and time again. And you know, and so don't feel bad about how much it costs to fly the space shuttle and do the International Space Station, because the things they can do on the space station, like protein crystal growth and using the bioreactor and doing the materials processing in zero gravity and learning all those things and bringing them back to Earth to use them on Earth, are going to revolutionize the way we do things on this planet. And advancing technology is what NASA is all about. I think you can be very proud to be associated with building a crew exploration vehicle and getting back to do that, because I think getting people off this planet and learning to live and work on the Moon and Mars is going to be the key to our success as a civilization. I think we'll go back to the Moon to preserve civilization on Earth, and we'll go to Mars to extend civilization there. And that's what human beings are all around. They're great explorers. You know, kind of like in my backyard, I got the fire ants, and they move around the front yard. They're real explorers. And why are they doing that? Why would anybody ever explore? Well, over the long haul, it's to preserve the species, and that's what it's all about. So I think y'all can be very proud of being part of a program that the inevitable result is preservation of species, our kids and our grandkids. And that'll be just wonderful, because I think you'd be very proud of doing that, because those little guys are going to do a lot of good things for the future. Well, I appreciate everything, and I really wish you have a great 25th anniversary, because it's a wonderful machine, has done good things, and it's got a lot of good to do yet. So hang in there and make it work. Thank you.